Is it time to start or what happening?
You can start right now.
We don't care.
Whatever makes you happy.
Okay. Well,
Because there's a link sheet.
I thought I was the only one that had that trouble.
yeah. I don't know how many of you actually picked out that line on linking sheet in
Oh,
the
there's
spot.
another one.
Oh, my goodness.
Say we had some hoof trouble, huh?
Right. So this is a actually not far away from here, somewhere in Union City and west of St. Louis. This guy have a flock of about 650 in this flock. So one day, it's about 6-7 years ago, called me out and could you come over and check out my Footrot problem? I said, okay. You have anyone working on ground? Oh yes, it's very easy to. I said I'm expecting you isolate out the problem animals so we could check on it and take the swab samples, all this. Yes, but when I went up there, not. And so where your flock? He said about 2-3 miles away. So how do you do that? Oh, I show you. It's very easy to isolate. That is how you just run them through and anything left behind, cut the line and put into another fence and then we check. But did you see a lot of them actually went through already?
Yes.
So that is when you have that, a lot of animals. Oops, what happened? You actually, it's very difficult to manage and inspect. But what about if you have small farm, small flock, like this? Do you recognize any sheep has a
Right there, right
problem?
Yeah.
This is one farm near, I think this side of Lebanon, I think Oliver. So this small flock is only about 30 sheep, and I found none of them actually not living. So the entire group, all got. So it's very hard to say if you have small animals, you could have better care and then could avoid the problem. It's basically how to manage, how to avoid this particular Footrot problem. But you see that what the condition of the sheep. Some people told me 20 years ago, when I first come to USA, oh, it's this particular sheep breed, hair sheep, they resist to anything, everything. They not suffer from Footrot, they not suffer from internal parasite, all these things. But in fact, it's not. Especially Footrot, not spare any breed, okay, any sheep. They could suffer, any sheep would suffer from this particular diseases. So that is, I try to start with. Okay. Okay, so today I just briefly cover a few aspects of Footrot and hoof disease problem. You already seen that what Footrot look like, but Footrot is not new problem. Okay. If you look at that one document published 1904, that is nearly 120 years ago, USDA, Department of USDA Agriculture, and then particularly produced a particular booklet, Footrot of the sheep, right? So it is really not new problem. And we been living with this problem generations, and I'm sure we're going to live with this next, I don't know how many generations with that. So as I said that time, this disease not necessarily cause the death of the animals, but it's certainly cause the economically and lose the productivity and make the animals a lot of suffering. Right? So many other countries also have the same problem. If you look at the literature and papers, there's rich of the publications. Hundreds of papers published about Footrot. So this is even as old and common problem. You have a lot of studies and publications and treatments and prevention and so on. Especially many sheep countries like Australia and New Zealand. Especially in New Zealand, the climate condition is very similar to eastern part of the US, and that the Footrot problem is very serious. And they usually leading the field how to treat, how to trim, how to breed, and so on. And this is actually way of the definition. Guy in 1950s and 60s come up with all this kind of clinical studies and made that even now without the vaccine available also here. That is all the Australian studies. And according to that, they defined into 3 categories: benign, which is less infectious, and intermediate, and then virulent Footrot. But in US, we just say scald or Footrot, right? But as far as looking at the pathogenic background, there's not much clear cut, you know. It could be developed from benign to intermediate, from intermediate to very virulent Footrot. But many classic publications, even in US, if you read a lot of state extension newsletters and so on, they're always saying Footrot is caused by only 2 microorganisms, which is totally wrong. In fact, any combination of the 2 or 3 different bacteria could cause the same symptoms and damage as well as that classical pathogens. And if you're looking at the clinical sensitivity of the breed, some people saying sheep are more serious, others saying goat more serious, but I believe most of the common food scald actually much more sensitive in goat than the sheep. However, infectious Footrot may be more sensitive in sheep than the goat. However, both that the small ruminant is much more sensitive than the cattle, horse, swine, and wild ungulates like deer, and so on. So here's some description. I mentioned in the highlight for some particular bacteria, for example, a Tropirilla pyogenes. Some study actually showed that is most important bacteria causing the Footrot. But many classic literature never mentioned that, right? Because it is always depends particular locality and animals involved and how it's actually initiated. So as far as that the initial infection started, and when that internal structure of the foot been open like hoof and laminae between the toe and hoof been infected, they exactly create same wound and same clinical problem. In fact, we studied several years mostly in southwestern Missouri, Springfield, around near shore. You could go around all this area. But basically, a lot of footrot every year. Right? And we, over 3-4 years, inspected and visited more than 60 farmers and the flock, and footrot sampled, swab sampled more than 1,000 animals. We identified and cultured over 5,000 isolates. And sometimes one particular farm only sampled about 5 to 10 animals, could culture out more than 100 different species. But very few farms actually found for Decolobacter nodosus, which is classical footrot bacteria. Only 6 out of 60 farms we visited over several years actually identified as the footrot bacteria. Like that small farm, flock I showed you, that's actually just happened over a week. The whole flock has been rotten and limping, and then we actually cultured out to outright nodosus. But others, each case always they have the same symptom of the footrot, but the main culprit is not necessarily nodosus or Fusobacterium necrophorum. Instead, with all others, even some cases in E. coli end up with major cause of the damage to the food, because it's all collective effect of that many different species or mixed bacteria infection in that. So I just given some cases, people who published and studied this. You not have to, and this is actually I summarize what we some years with how many group of bacteria we actually could identify as mostly the anaerobic and aerobic bacteria. But supposed to be in footrot, the reason they got rotten and got infected is creating kind of a pocket area where there's no oxygen provided. So that's creating anaerobic condition. Therefore, in that condition, mostly so-called gram-negative bacteria. So if you're just looking for what actually main cause of that particular clinical pathogen, you no need to do that just air culture. You basically just concentrate on the anaerobic culture. But we did all of them, so we know what actually involved. And I'm not sure this could be played or not. Looks like no. Okay. Make one more attempt. Presentation technology available here. But anyway, this is just one video clip when we actually clean that particular footrot wound and using just cotton bud or toothpick and scratch on it and put on a glass slide and put a drop of water and put the cover slip and look under the microscope. You could see how many millions of the different bacteria swimming and wobbling around this under the slide. So we, of course, we can't see it by our naked eyes, right? Okay. So when we have there's so many different bacteria and different classes, and each of them giving the damage to the hoof and feet and hoofs. Which way they actually damaging that hoof and feet? They basically several dozen different ways to making that damage. The first one is called reproducing a group of bacteria, for example, Tropirilla pyogenes, this kind of bacteria. They usually produce particular toxin. When it's contact with the tissue cells or blood cells, they actually make a hole on that particular cell, right? And therefore, they're producing cytolysin. Lysin means melting it, just. So they're destroying the tissue that way. Second one is called hemolysin, and we're probably all familiar. They have several different types, alpha, beta, gamma, and so on. And that particular poison is produced by several typical bacteria, including E. coli, which we're all familiar with. And third one is very important to the Footrot, because this one is produced by Fusobacterium necrophorum. And that toxin called leukotoxin. Leukotoxin, that's leukocyte is our white blood cells, which is immune cells. So that particular toxin is particularly attack the immune systems, so that they subsequently create the necrosis in the foot and hoof. And third one is enzymes. This is much more deadly. It's secreted out from bacteria very slowly, but it's very deadly. And that is many different enzymes involved. If that enzyme particularly attack on the collagen, we call collagenase. If it attack the proteins, called protease, and so on. And denodosis, which is most pathogenic foot bacteria, actually produce this kind of enzyme. So when the bacteria, this particular denodosis, they actually grew very slow and very difficult to culture out. But once they lodged into that wound, they will grow there very slowly. But whenever they grow, they have a hair-like structure called pili. They stretch it out, and on all the horn-like structure or the tendon, and then just get stuck there. And after a while, the bacteria themselves don't make any movement. Instead, they're shaking the hair or pili. So-called twitching activity. And whenever do that, they're producing the secreting out the enzyme and damaging the tendon and so on. So I just show you how they actually work synergetically between this. Why is not showing up there?
Are you trying to advance the slide?
Yeah. Okay, it's already gone past it. Okay. So this one is necrophorum, and they basically produce the leukotoxin. And this, if you look at the medical dictionary, they actually have the particular definition what this use and how it actually attack the hoof. And first, making the breakage or weakness of the skin between the interdigital space and creating the particular wound. For example, this is one hoof, damaged hoof. You see there's some damage here in the digital space. And if we use that just glass slide, make a print and then stain into fluorescent, and then you could magnify, you could see actual bacteria, how many bacteria already lodged in there. If you look at the phase contrast microscope, this particular bacteria isolated, you can see on the corner. And below is you actually see that cup of the hoof, and seen by electron microscope. So, and this one is the case of the toxic enzyme damage done to the hoof and foot bone, mostly represented by Nicolobacter nodosus. And this bacteria first identified its role in Footrot in 1941, and previously named differently, but in 1990 they have renamed it, reclassified, and it works very different way. It's typically produced interdigital necrophallosis or a foot rot, and one of the main functional structures so-called himbriae or hair, or some books say this pili or whatever. So you will see that the microscope, you will see that that is actually pure culture from one of the nodosus. So this stuff collectively produce the proteases, that is protein digestive enzymes, and when this come together, it's just like burning of your that particular tendon or interconnective tissues. Right? That's how they make the damage. So why you don't test it out often? Because they always have some kind of developmental phases. So they make the damage, and then many other mixed bacteria come in, take over the colonies, and they kind of getting a less and less population-wise. So once it's 2, 3, 4 weeks, when you test it, you don't test out often, because damage already done, and their phase of the peak is already over, and many other mixed bacteria come in and taken over the population. So that is how any foot scald or foot rot initiated. You usually have somewhere to initiate particular wound or lesion or infection study. Once they study, just one after another get it prevented, and once they mix the many bacteria, they're just like, the bacteria is also like community. They're just using each other's bioproduct or metabolites and so on, they could further develop. But there's some conditions. For example, some temperature, mostly they're favored in temperate environment, moisture environment, or some physical wound and lesions. And climatical condition, and in fact, many conditions actually we created for animals. Yeah? We make a lot of restriction for the movement, put them in particular place and fence them somewhere they can't go out. So over the time, soaking in that mud, they usually develop a lot of condition for that animals develop hoof diseases or foot rot. For example, high density set stocking, you've already seen in New Zealand, right? That picture actually taken in southland of the South Island. So when we usually breed and raise the brownish sheep, and grasses grew very high, and rainfall is very high, but they, in order to utilize grass efficiently, they usually set stocking. That means nearly thousands of sheep put into small area pasture, let them eat down to the grassroots and then move to another place. Because of the land is just flat and high rainfall, they're just stepping on each other's footprint, and if some sheep have the disease, they very easily to transmit. Another thing is the obvious wet and muddy environment. That is actually not New Zealand, that's somewhere in Oregon. Okay, we have a field there, and when we visited, a lot of Texas sheep would look like this. It's in one small confined area, all standing in mud. Or you could stock handling or gathering flock in contaminated facility like this one. Or you try to put away the trouble for someone else, and someone else bought that and keep breeding the infected animals and further generating that sick flock. In fact, the overall geographical location and climate also have major effect on it. If you're looking at the Missouri, somewhere we are in that green area, that is high rainfall from half of Oklahoma and east, as I would say, is naturally footrot prone areas. So anywhere green and blue, they likely provide footrot development conditions. So if you're looking at the foot, it's a very small part of the body if you by the weight, but the functionality is very complex. And we're just looking at, 2 inches from tip of the hoof up, just that area, but it's affect the entire life. So piece of the hoof I have there, if you could magnify under the electron microscope, you could see a lot of gaps and creases and fishes and so on we can't see by naked eyes. When you further magnify, you actually see a lot of bacteria actually exist within all the spaces. At this point, there's no harm, just commensal bacteria within the soil and manure and so on. But whenever that crack further opened and link the gap between that internal structure and that where the pollen starts. And this is normal hoof structure and some anatomy. So if you're looking at the sheep and goat hoof like this, and you have that in mind when you're trimming hoof and so on, give that kind of contour and slope. Don't just come in and clip off the tip, and then you could make the injury, actually create somewhere to start the infection. So that's how they usually start, from between the toes, somewhere moist and started infecting. And they usually start from here and then go to side of that hoof, or start from the white line area, so-called just internal wall of the hoof, and then sole, and then all around under the sole, and then whole sole is gone, and then next step would be infecting around the toe, and the hoof probably follow. That's when it's very serious. So this is common symptoms. All of them you already seen of the video clip. They basically first, when it's very light, they probably manage to just dangling their foot and carry it on and keep going, right? Limping. But when it gets more serious, what happens is they no longer do that. They started to kneel down and walking on knees. Reason the knees is likely both front feet have been infected. If it is just one, they probably still could go ahead to walk. And you see that goat also looking toward you, about to handshake with you, say, okay, this is problem. And the several that sheep on the lower side corner, that's actually not far away from here. I think just north of Mobley. Okay, it's actually very small flock, and they thought they was really taking very good care of them, but ended up whole fence full of sheep got footrot, and many of them actually not just footrot there. All hoof is eaten out by maggot, fly struck. So this thing is, if you're not intervened, it's from one state to go to next state. For example, the first state, what you see is just skull, right? foot scalp. So you can see very clear white line, and they have little bit damage here and little bit damage on the sole on the middle part, but that's not big problem. So if you intervene and then treat or preventive treatment, foot baths and so on, around this step you could stop that further development. If you not do anything, just leave it alone and keep going, what happens is they're going to develop in the next step and really become the foot rot. You can see that third picture, the entire sole is probably gone, just hollow shape, right? And if you not take care at that moment, the last one, you see all that white dot is all maggot, right? Just all crawling around. It's everything within that hoof shall go eaten out. So this is from healthy foot and hoof become benign foot rot or scald, and then develop into intermediate foot rot or severe scald, and then it's further developing into virulent foot rot or contagious foot rot if it is happen to have infected with the denodosis and so on. And it's also accompanied with that fly strike, especially in summertime. So this is how they defined. I just showed you that we developed this 5-point scoring system, just showing up to what particular damage we could regard it as just foot scald, and we no need to do any swab culturing or identifying bacteria. But if it is get developed further, we probably suspect if there are any infectious pathogen involved. We may do some sampling, wound sampling, lesion sampling, and culture out the particular bacteria. And even we could do that antibody resistant test and advise the farmers which particular antibody they actually could use for this. And as we said, whenever the infection happens, if it is involved with just pathogenic denodosis, let's say, it's not necessarily just one strain, because in denodosis, so far they already identified 21 different species, substrains or subspecies. So as maybe 2 out of this 20 or 8 out of this 20 same time infected. So it's this kind of multiplying a virulence involved. So how they infect? We are already seen that the video clip how it is actually infected. Because once infected animals stepping on and laying on same ground, others come along, drinking from same trough, and they are using same route, they likely have opportunity to spread this around, because it's not necessarily you clean from one hand to another quick like that. If that particular wound step on that ground, let's say near the water trough, and that bacteria will stay alive another 2 to 3 weeks. So within that 2 to 3 weeks, another animal come in with have initial wound and step on that. It's just like culturing up, as how it's spread along. Sometimes we, when you're reading a lot of veterinary clinic publication, you're probably confused with that other diseases, but very similar. But as far as the producers, you don't worry to clarify this one is foot rot, that one is scald, other one is two abscesses and so on, because cause of that is very similar. And treatment and prevention method is also very similar. But if you're really interested, there's one table I just showing you which way they're actually different. For example, if that abscesses have a pus discharge from the particular lesion, but the foot rot caused by denodosis probably not. okay? And they also have some different odor. When you smell it, very different, distinctive, different smell. And some people commingle your goat or sheep with the cattle. And that's actually good, because on our farm we also do that mixed grazing exercise. But as far as the disease concerned, some bacteria cause the footrot and hoof diseases in sheep and goat, don't cause much damage in cattle. So in that case, if that is cattle has this carrying this particular bacteria, they become reservoir. And then when this opportunity arises, for example, humid and high rainfall and so on, they could pass on to your goat or sheep. So probably if you suddenly found this, but when you mixed grazing with your cattle, you probably look at, oh, it is possible actually caught from the cattle, and you could separate them while and see if anything differences. So how to prevent that? Basically, I always keep telling people who farming sheep or goat or camels, this kind of small ruminant, if you committed to raise these animals, farm these animals, you can't afford to be lazy. You have to keep looking at it, keep doing something, and do something before it happens, right? Once it happens and beyond your control is more trouble. So one thing we could do about is do that foot trimming, hoof trimming, and foot bathing, or that the spray in the season often happen on your farm. For example, on your farm, previous years you usually have footrot problem or foot scald problem, let's say end of May to July, something like that. If you know that in that locality, you probably set up kind of a regular foot bathing once weekly, carry out, let's say, continuously 6 to 7 weeks, right, during that time. And this likely solve your problem. But if you decided to do the foot bathing, you first trim it before you foot bath, okay? But don't do it after foot bath. So when you're trimming, is one thing is you're going to trim off that some excessive growth of the hoof. Another thing is you're also exposing a lot of area they already blocked, and then now you could cut it open, and the chemicals actually could immerse into it when it's soaking in the particular foot path. You asking something? No? Okay.
Unless you want to tell me what chemical to use for the foot bath.
Yeah, I will.
Now wait.
Right. So it's for this clipper or cutters, I have various range of them. First, a few, let's say 5 of them the same size. That is small but very handy. And when the hoof is soft and in rainy season, it's very easy to manipulate and cut it down. But if the hoof is large and hard, you probably could use the larger ones. However, if it is happening dry time and hoof is really dry out and deformed and so on, you can't cut with this. There's now also electric powered one, even battery operated one, grinder, one similar to your use for a horseshoe. Preparation is available, and you could use that to trim it. Doesn't matter whichever you could use, it's best you could sterilize, clean between the animals at least. Of course, you could clean between the foot, that is better. And that's particular solution. You just use ordinary foot bath you made up, or just use that spray iodine liquid and so on. Just handy, spray a few times before cutting next one. Not, unknowingly you spray that footrot passaging from one animal to another. And foot bath or foot soak, you could make up on your farm if you have a sizable animal flock and you could regularly running it. You could set up like that permanent underneath your raceway, or just on the above that one is temporarily set up with by wooden panel. You also could continuously use that solution for a month or two. And between the use, if you suspect the concentration is changed, you could use it with hydrometer, and then if it is changed, you could add more fresh powder in it. For example, zinc sulfate. And zinc sulfate is environmentally friendly. It's regarded as one fertilizer source. End product you also could, just mix with your menu and then you could use as fertilizer. One thing I observed when you foot soaking or foot bathing with goat, they are kind of very clever animals. So when you're setting up over the trap, make sure they don't have foothold outside of your trap. So you put your fence a little bit inside so they not step on it. For that one, that's actually set up at Prada College. Mr. J. Wilkins, he and his students put up. They made a very nice trap, very long walk, but they put the fence just outside of the trap, so that all the sheep just walking over it, not into that solution. So he had second thought, what we can do, okay, let them just run, many times run through, don't have any time to step on the trap. So that's how we saw using several students just constantly drive them through. And we run this program several years. They actually didn't have any footrot outbreak this 3 years. And you also could use the dry chemicals, or you could use the oral therapy, and there's already giving you some cases how much you use, how long you use. As far as the dry chemicals, I also observed many, especially in Missouri, most of places flat land. And then you have the fence, and when they have the high moisture or rainfall, animals don't have any place to stand high and drain out the water from the hoof and feet. So you could create easily, you bulldoze some soil and create one boom, some area, and put some sand soils, and the animals, when they, after that muddy day, they could go up to that highland, just drain off the water and stay dry for an hour or two, and that will help. Another thing is you also, some people put out some lime on that path to the water point or trough, so animals actually could step on it and kind of also sterilizing effect on this. And or if you have condition, let's say if you have shelter or something, if you could create some kind of slate, wooden slate, little bit above the ground, so when they have rain or something, animals not have to step into the muddy menus or urine, all this wet stuff, so they could drain out some water on the hoof. So keep some relief, and that helps. So all this small bit of things actually help to prevent. It's tedious, it's laborious, but help you solve a lot of problems before happening. If you have already outgrown and have the footrot anyway, then the next thing is you're going to treat them. And one effective treatment is you giving injectable antibiotics. Most people, I think most of farmers, they usually have that the LA 200 or 300 on the farm. But when you use that, you have to check on the expiry date, okay? If you have one big bottle, you just keep there 10 years and you still keep injecting, you're just cheating yourself, you know, it's no longer effective. And if you use this option, make sure you use the right dose and right times. If it said you give 3 injections a day apart, you have to do that. You don't make a double or triple dose and give them once and forget about it, throw them out. That's not effective because all medicine have a half-life. That means regardless how much you're given, after 24 hours or 48 hours, most of them are excreted out of the body. They're no longer functioning, can't maintain that particular concentration required. So you have to follow the instruction. And there's recently some long-acting, some new antibiotics. In European countries, they published recently a few years, the new product called Footrot. And another one is using in Australia, they mentioned, I think it's called Dextrin or Macrocin. They said this is much more effective than traditional LA 200 or 300. And there's actually one data in Danish. They said LA 200 compared with Footrot is what, 79% cured compared to 93% cured with Footrot. So as I said, if you never use that new medicine, it's possibly a good choice. You could give one-time break, you know. But whenever you use this stuff, you have to treat all suspected animals at once. Totally clear out this. Not just treat a few and then leave a few on and then the same problem be carried on by other untreated animals. And same medicine we talked about, you also could make your own remedy by topical treatment. I used to make up like iodine, alcohol, antibiotics, and so on. And you could actually external treat it as you not required veterinary. If you injectable, you have to get veterinary prescription, right? But for that over-counter available antibiotics, you actually could make up your own remedy and then spray on that wound. Okay, that's not harmless. And there's a few tables I'm not going to show, some old data presented by Dr. Whitney. Said how the soaking, antibiotics, vaccination, all this stuff come together to how much percentage they cured. And he said vaccination, treatment, baths could make 100% cure. I'm not very sure, but at least they could much better than using each individual method, I would say that. What about vaccination? How many of you have vaccination? Do you use that?
They don't exist.
No, there's exist. There's
My
also,
veterinarian said nothing existed. I dealt with this all
You
summer.
can't get it anymore.
yeah, it is actually, yes, quite a few years ago
Please tell me.
they was not available, but now they're actually available. Now only available from your veterinarian. And I think a group of people, even who's the guy, as chair of this symposium is Mr. Gary Massis, right? I think he and his friend, Bruce Ken, and another friend who's now in Springfield, they actually have a deal and they have brought in quite a lot.
I would gladly buy it.
And I saw he actually stored into a refrigerator and showing me his stock. I said, what did you do with that? He said he injected them all, but you still have a Footrot. Why?
They all
Because
got it.
yes, so-called Footrot vaccine made in Australia.
Yes.
They basically made for bacterial strains mostly found in that area. Some of them probably here, So they have the two versions. One is called the bivalent vaccine, which is only cover 2 strains of the denodosis. Another one is cover 8 strains. But the problem is, if you have the 2 strains, they will last longer, 6 to 8 months effective. If you're choosing multiple strains, they only last you 2-3 months. So you have to inject at least 2 times within a season. And another thing is, this must be covered a particular bacterial strain designed for that particular vaccine. If it is not covered that, for example, one case I recently visited in Missouri, southwestern Missouri, he injected twice, but they still have the same lesion and same problem. Reason is there's none of the bacteria causing that wound is denodosis. It's all other bacteria. So all other bacteria is not work for it, right? So you have to be sure that it's really the vaccine is effective, and then it's cover your particular strain. So that is Footrot. It's made in Australia. It could be used in goat or not. I'm not sure. That is what I talked about. 2 bacteria or multi-bacteria, 9. How long it lasts, protective levels, and so on. And it is available, okay? So if you really need to use. Another one is called, I'm not sure this one is allowed to use in sheep and goat or not, but it's made for vaccine for the cattle, for a Fusobacterium necrophorum, called Fusobad. You probably ask about it. If you have cattle problem, and then that commingling with your sheep and goat and likely cause problem, you could say, okay, if I could use this for my cattle, prevent further, infect my goat or sheep. Or you actually could use for sheep and goat, I'm not sure. But it's not, FDA not approved for sheep and goat. Okay? And last thing is, if all this not work, only thing you could do is do the selection. I mean, disease resistance selection. And for this, we actually had one trial funded by the USDA a few years ago. I had a friend of mine at New Zealand, Lincoln University. He developed a kind of a gene marker for this disease resistance in a different breed called Corridor. So I get this marker, and we actually tested over 1,100 sheep in 3 years if we have this gene exist in our flock. And it showed it exists, but it's expressed as in Corridor sheep or not. That was not sure. So that is a bit complex. There's 26 different alleles involved, but we made the thing is simple. Put out to 5 classes as the score, and this worked as kind of 2 dominant genes. So here's the result of the screening. So when we tested on all the different breeds, for example, main breeds that we work in Canadian, you could see about 20% of animals actually carrying resistant gene, double copy, and another 25 or 30% of animals, well, nearly 40% animals have a score of 2, which is moderate resistance, and next 30% of them is kind of susceptible, and rest of about 20% of them is actually more susceptible for the Footrot. So, and then I looked at other breed, it's very similar. So if it is really effective and expressed in other breed as well as the resistance, is worthwhile to selection. And this is my summary. So most cases this disease is not life-threatening. It could be preventable if you use attentive management, control, and treatment. Okay, but for longer term, selection of footrot resistance in small ruminant species with very restrict selection and culling is recommended. And my acknowledgement for some of the colleagues and this organizing committee for invitation. And thank you very much. Time is up. Thank you.
So, on that one of the slides you said oral therapy. Would that be like sprinkling half a gram over feed, or is that?
Oral that means you actually like drenching.
Okay.
Yeah. But you have to oral that dose. And use that chemical actually.
The one you had, I think we spray on the feet, the copper sulfate with the 10% vinegar.
Yeah.
Just spray on the feet when you trim them or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Whenever trim, when you spray, what you do is you actually make up another bottle of water or an iodine solution or alcohol. So it's really clean well. And hold up a few seconds. When it's dry, you actually spray that treatment material. And after that,